Welcome to our Ngerati studio. We're located at the CTICC for the African Utility Week 2014. And we have with us David Walker, who is the CEO for the energy sector at DNV GL. We'd like to start off just discussing the project that you've got in Kenya at the moment, the high transmission line that is connecting wind energy to their city. It's quite a fantastic project. Would you like to tell us more about it?
Yeah, sure. So DNV GL is acting on behalf of Ketraco, who are the Kenyan transmission company.
Right.
And so we'll be their owner engineer in managing the project, which will take the power generated by the 300 megawatt development at Lake Turkana and transmit the electricity to near Nairobi.
Right.
So it's quite an exciting project. It's over 400 kilometers, it's 400 kV, and it connects the biggest wind farm in Africa to one of the developing cities of Africa.
Okay. Why has it taken so long for vendors to get into Africa and to actually harness that fantastic natural resource that we have on this continent? Finance, regulation?
I think it's a good question. I mean, I think what's happened is that obviously the African economy in the last few years, many of the countries now are developing quite quickly. And so that's become, there's more of a market for electricity in the whole power sector.
Yes.
And I think when you add that together to changing risk that's perceived by both the financiers and the manufacturers. So it's not quite a perfect storm, but it's heading in that direction, and a lot of the indicators are encouraging.
Okay. What does this project actually mean for the community as a whole, for the country as a whole? Is it going to benefit your outlying rural areas? Is it going to only benefit the city centre? Can you give us a little bit of insight?
I think it's in many areas. I mean, it's going to actually generate about 20% of Kenya's power requirements.
Right.
During the construction phase, there's about 2,500 jobs alone at the wind park, plus several thousand more on the line. And then when it's finally in place after construction, there'll be 200 permanent jobs. So there's job creation. There's big boost on the power side. Obviously help the whole area around Nairobi in terms of industry and development. And I think later on, if there are further expansions, this line can be a spine that future distribution can move out to the rural areas from it.
Outlying areas, yes, because I mean there are so many of those who are without electricity, and there's probably some really bustling businesses just waiting to
Yeah, but I think what this is it shows what can be done in a country like Kenya, and will hopefully encourage other developments beyond Lake Turkana as well.
Absolutely. Now, what we were just discussing before was with regards to energy storage. So this 20% that this wind energy is going to create, as far as energy is concerned for Kenya. What happens when the wind stops blowing?
Well, actually,
where does that energy go?
Yeah, I mean, but one of the interesting things about Lake Turkana, actually, and why this site was chosen, is I think on average the wind blows about 22 hours a day. So compared to, say, solar, which obviously is about night and day, the wind resource is actually excellent. It's fairly unique. So it's high wind, it's a lot of turbines, so the need for storage in this project is slightly less.
All right.
But sometime Kenya will have to obviously provide some sort of backup from conventional generation.
Exactly. And what were the obstacles involved? Was it difficult for them to obtain finance? Were their projects, did they have a level of bankability that it was just, investors came rushing into?
Well, I think that's actually why this project is quite interesting. It has taken some time to get off the ground, but there was a lot of interest in terms of financing. It's quite an interesting mix because the development banks, the Asian and European, so the African and European development banks are both involved. There's money from South Africa, like Nedbank is involved. There's London investment money, like Aldrich International, and then there's aid money coming from Finland, from Norway, from the Netherlands, and Spain, all going towards this project. Everyone coming together. They all believe in it, and I think that's fairly unique to in this area to build something of this scale with all those interested parties. So I think it's a great boost forward.
It just astounds me that Africa as a whole has just got so many sunshine hours, so much solar.
Yeah.
Hydropower is obviously a bit of a tricky situation when it comes to drought.
Yeah.
But it's there. The potential is there. Geothermal. It's there, but it just hasn't been harnessed. I mean, what has been stopping people from coming in? I don't know if you can highlight it or expand on that.
It's a very good question. Because
taken
you're right,
quite a
it has
long
taken
time, hasn't it?
some time. I mean, obviously here in South Africa, historically, there's been plenty of coal, and
Yes.
coal's been the dominant generator. I think also a lot of the grids that have been built historically often have been emanating from the coast, and so they've had diesel or some other power
Yes.
generation.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of historical inertia, and
Right.
really I don't think people have realised the renewables. But remember, the cost of renewables was quite expensive in the past. Solar
It's
was
coming
quite
down now,
expensive,
isn't it?
and when now
Yeah.
solar has fallen off a cliff
As
in
well
terms
as
of cost,
installation.
and also onshore wind. So the fact that
Yes.
renewables is cheaper, we got the resources you said, we got finance interested in it,
Yep.
and I think we'll actually see a big leap forward in the next few years, both in solar and wind.
Now, when all these storage solutions come about, and we start seeing more renewable energy coming in,
Yeah.
thanks to investors. Do you foresee in Africa a lot of people going, or a lot of industries going off grid? Because there seems to be a trend overseas, and with energy storage, with the developments the way they are, it does seem to be that a lot of not just residential communities in Europe, for example in Spain and UK and Germany, but it seems it's starting to move to South Africa now as well. In Limpopo area, Southern Africa, a mine has actually gone off-grid and is now relying on solar power.
Yeah.
Where do you see this going?
I think it's actually, you're right, a very interesting development that
Yeah.
we're seeing, and we're involved in a number of projects, some of the
Yes.
ones you've kind of described, because it gives these communities much greater control over their own destinies, if you like, from a generation standpoint. So I think for large scale, for some municipalities, for large scale industrial users, you mentioned mines.
Yes.
We've seen it even in US defense bases. We're seeing it in a variety of places. This is a solution. But at the end of the day, they still often have to be connected to the grid somehow, because they need some form of backup.
Right.
And that creates a lot of issues from a regulatory standpoint, from a price standpoint,
Yeah.
how much standby capacity you actually have on the grid.
That's it.
So it does create certain problems, but it certainly is a combination of renewables with energy efficiency, with storage. We're seeing more and more of
Yes.
these kind of developments.
Now, just going back to large-scale power production and integration of renewables onto the line. I mean, there seems to be a little bit of concern with the amount of renewables that is coming onto
Yep.
the line, and the integration seems to cause quite a lot of issues. Did you have to restructure the infrastructure in Kenya? I mean, what did they have to do there to integrate this huge amount of
Well,
wind
luckily,
power?
I think in Kenya, it's the grid there is still in a very early stage of development. In fact,
Okay, all right.
And so from that perspective, it was maybe not such a large issue. Although Lake Turkana is obviously fairly
Yes.
remote,
Yes.
hence the new line.
Yes.
But certainly in more like in South Africa and other countries with a more, if you like, a grid that is based on old generation, the renewables coming on in new locations.
Yes.
So somewhere like South Africa is considering 4 or 5 different, if you like, spurs that will allow clusters of renewables to come onto the grid.
Yes.
That's a model, for instance, that Germany has used for its offshore, that
Yes.
the Dutch are currently considering. So that's one way of getting over it, is knowing where the resources are for renewables by wind
Right.
capacity or solar resource, and then, if you like, helping that development by investing early and letting
Yeah.
the grid, if you like, control where the developments actually are.
All right, just so that you're harnessing that energy from the
Correct,
outset,
yeah.
you're not losing any of it unnecessarily.
Yeah.
Because I'd imagine it would make the existing grid quite unstable if suddenly you've got all these, renewable resources coming online.
Exactly, and
It must
that's
cause havoc.
exactly. Well, no. Well, if managed properly, it does. I mean, Germany and other countries have certainly
Yes.
have done it, but it does require.
But it's been gradual there,
it has
hasn't
to
it?
be, yeah.
Yeah.
So it does require, as you say, very good management, and this mixture, we said, of renewables, because of the variability of the resource, along with having standby capacity, along with having
Yeah.
storage, as well as
Yeah.
a robust grid, is very important that everything is connected.
Absolutely. Now, the project is phenomenal. I mean, as you say, it's the largest, energy production from wind power. It's the largest in Africa. There must have been a huge amount of challenges that investors and project managers
but I
were
think
faced
the
with.
key thing is that the resource, as I say, was a very good wind resource.
Yes.
Because some of the things we will have to work on are logistics. So new roads have got to be built with Dutch government money. It's building the road system. The size of wind turbines that can be used there are actually quite small. They're about less than 1 megawatt each because of the logistics of getting them to the site.
Oh, all right.
You know,
still effective though?
Still
or?
effective, but more of them. But
Right.
you know, whereas in Africa and Europe, maybe the onshore turbines are between 3 and 6 megawatts. These are
Yes.
one, so they're relatively small. But again, because the road system, the logistics, the difficulties of getting them to site, they're actually slightly smaller.
Okay. What
So
about
things like that.
finance?
Well,
Was
say
finance easy to obtain? Were investors interested?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know the fact that they've got such a mix of finance from development banks, from private equity, from aid agencies all together has
Yes.
been the fact that you know it's such an attractive project.
Yeah.
Because it's really underwritten by the fact that the wind resource is so good.
Yes.
The
yes.
demand in the expanding Kenyan economy is so good.
Yeah.
You put those two things together, it's
can't go
great.
wrong.
You can balance it.
Do you think Africa's energy development is on track? You know, from what you've seen in the last, I don't know, decades, do you think that it's on track? Do you think it's still sluggish?
I mean, I would have to
And
say
why?
it's well, why is a good question. You'd have to argue, I think, perhaps that it's a little bit sluggish because, again, a combination of latitude and geology, if you like, means that the resources that are available to Africa for power generation are actually quite large.
Yeah.
But the level of investment has been relatively slow. But I think it's tied again to a lot of the money will have to come from outside of Africa, and so it's back to this sort of combination of the growth of the African economy, the cutting down of things like corruption, the developing, if you like, people to build and operate. So the demographics are also changing in terms of skilled labor.
Okay,
All those
all right.
things are really important to come together.
Okay. All right. Sounds like they still have a long way to go, but at least it's on the right track.
There are encouraging signs, really
Good.
encouraging signs.
My last question. It's only the first day of the conference,
Yep.
but has there been anything that's been really exciting for you, or perhaps disappointing? Has there been a trend that you've picked up on that maybe you weren't aware of?
I think I'm actually impressed by the buzz. You can hear it in the background,
Yeah.
perhaps. The conference is really going quite well. If there's a disappointment, is back to again the fact I'd say that the renewables industry I'd say is underrepresented at this conference, given the potential there is for renewables
Yeah.
in Africa.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much. That was incredibly interesting. We could go on forever.
Okay.
Perhaps we could connect near the end of the conference to find out how
More
the
than
rest of it
happy to.
went. But I hope you enjoy it and you
Thank
find
you.
it most successful.
Nice.
And to our viewers, thank you very much for joining us. Please note that we have a number of interviews that we are doing over the next 2 days of the conference, so feel free to have a look at those as well. Thank you.